In this video, we're going to look at Vertextures, which are a nice little feature hidden away inside of 3D-Coat. Okay, to understand Vertextures a little bit more, I've got two cylinders here. One is a high-res one and the other is very low-res. And if I just switch over to wireframe mode, we can see the difference in resolution of these two cylinders. So I'm going to go to the Vertextures here, default textures, and I'm just going to choose one of these ones. With paint selected here, I'm going to make sure that I've got white fill on here, and I'll start to paint on this high resolution cylinder. And as you expect, because it's high res, we're able to zoom in on this and maintain a lot of detail. And we can go quite a way into this cylinder. Let's go over to our low resolution and start painting on here. You can see on this one that even though this object is low resolution, I'm still able to see a good amount of detail on this object. What I can do inside the Factures room here, go over to my vertex settings, and if I go down to here, you can see I've got scale on here. I'm just going to turn off the low res image first and just have a look at this one first. And I'm going to just scale this texture. So you can see it's getting larger, and we can zoom in and out. So here I can rotate the textures around, modify the bump, the roughness, and the metallic of this texture here. So let's scale this back down to what it was previously, somewhere around there. And have a look now at the low resolution object. And you might have thought that this would have a blurry image on here, but as we can see, we are maintaining a very high quality texture on this very low resolution sculpt object. And remember, there are no UVs on this object. So what I can do now, as I did before, is I can scale this object even on this very low resolution image. If we zoom in, we can see I can zoom very close to this low resolution image and have a very high quality image. So this could be really useful, for example, if you're a concept artist and you've got some background elements that you don't really need much detail in terms of geometry, but the texture on here can actually help you to create an illusion of a much more complex piece of geometry. So let's have a look now at our dinosaur. So back in the sculpt room, we have our dinosaur. And I've gone ahead on this layer and I've sculpted some damaged flesh on to the dinosaur, as you can see. So the aim here is for me to create a open wound on here and on these smoother parts and some sort of scaly skin, all using the Vertextures that we've just been looking at. So now I've moved from the sculpt room to the Factures room, and we have a new set of paint tools here, and we can see our sculpt object. So I've created a new layer. I'm going to call this one skin, and I've got a paint tool selected with white selected on here, and I'm just going to choose a softer brush on there and choose this dinosaur skin here. And on this layer, I'm just going to start to paint my Vertexture. And we can see that texture there working, but it's a little bit too small. So this is where our Vertexture settings come in, where we can start to change our scaling on here. So let's say I want something like this. If you want to, you can change your brush and your alpha over here. So let's do that. Let's make it a little bit more coarse and start to paint this in. So it is pressure sensitive, as you can see here. You can blend between different Vertextures using multiple layers, which is really useful. And then just making the brush smaller, going into these sort of detail areas on here. Okay, I'm going to go away now and I'm just going to finish this off rather than you sitting and watching me paint this. Okay, so there's my first layer of Vertexture placed down, and we can see here, turn that one on and off, we can see that texture. We can rotate this texture around, we can change the properties of this texture in terms of its bump, roughness and metallic, but let's leave it like that. And let's move on to our next texture. So I'm going to make a new layer now, and I'm just going to call this one flesh. I've got one over here, and I've got a couple of different fleshy type and skin ones here, and I'm just going to use this meat here, and I will start to paint in this meat texture on here. So what I just did is I just moved the lighting around, and you can see that bump information on that meat texture there. Let's just fill in really quickly, just go over these areas, and I'm just kind of like doing a little bit of over painting on here, just because what I can do down here is I can just move this flesh layer underneath the skin layer by clicking on this little icon here, and then it will move it underneath, so it doesn't matter how much I paint here, it's just going underneath the previous texture. So let's do the other parts around here. But we can already see here that we have quite a good texture going on here. And if we just move our light source around and obviously play with different light sources on here, we can see that we've got a really nice kind of texture there. And don't forget that we've got no UVs on this object at all. We've just got these tileable textures that I've made, and we can work these in and out as we like. So here I've got this meat one selected. So if I, for example, let's crank up the bump on this one. We can see that it becomes a lot more intense, and we can make it less rough and more wet looking as well if we prefer. So this is a really good way for us to experiment with our textures, because we haven't actually done any, we don't need to do retopology, we don't need to cut any seams on this. We can really just have a look at how these textures look, and if we do like them, we can always bake all this information, including all the bump, roughness and metallic information, to a low res cage if we want, that does have UVs on it. So let's continue here. Now, just a quick side note on here, that if you are thinking to create your Vertextures on your high resolution model, and then you are thinking that you want now to downsize the model or create a lower poly version of that model, if you go into, for example, the sculpt room with your surface object, in this case Dino LP model, and you resample, and let's just make this a lower resolution object, just any old one will do, you'll notice that the vertex information is lost. So if I go back to Factures, you can see that information is now gone. If you are going to be using a high resolution object, then make sure that that is the resolution that you will be painting these Vertextures onto, but don't change resolutions midway, because any paintwork that you have done will be lost. So I've gone ahead here and started to paint many layers, just building from the flesh layer at the bottom here and just building varying layers here based on my tiles that I've created here. Essentially having a tile per layer and building up that way. And then I've got full control over these in terms of the things, as we were saying here, of scale and rotation and all this stuff down here. One thing I can do on here, let's say I want to create a new layer, and I mentioned before about using a white on here. Well, we don't necessarily need to use white. We can use any color in here and it will tint the texture that we have here with this color value that we put in here. So if let's say I just use this color here, and let's use Dinosaur Skin 2, and now I can start to draw over that with a slight tint to that texture. Let's change that again, and let's try a different tint. Let's go over to this sort of luminous green, and we can use this one to tint that as well. And not forgetting, of course, that we do have an erase on here where we can go in maybe with a different texture brush on here and start to erase some of that green back on there. And of course, we can change the opacity of that particular layer there as well. So the Factures and Vertextures are a very good way to quickly prototype your sculpts with a texture with a lot of control over that texture and no UVs. So I hope you found this useful. See you next time.